All right, everybody, I'm Brett Kinsella. This is GAIN, the Generative AI News Rundown. We are here every week on Thursday. Lately, we've been here at 11 a.m. Eastern time on Thursday. We used to do a little bit later in the day, but we try to be here every week around the same time, midday East Coast time, morning West Coast time, and evening for Europe. And I know we have a lot of people from all over. If you are on LinkedIn or YouTube Live, give us a shout out in the chat. Let us know you're here, where you're coming in from, what you're interested in today. We have a big show this week. It's July. It seems like this is like a March or April week in terms of the type of announcements that are being made. Normally over the summer, tech companies tend to not make a lot of announcements because there's less attention. It doesn't matter. Everybody is coming hot and heavy with their stories. Meta came out with Llama 2. We're going to talk about that. AppleGPT news around that, although Apple wasn't talking about it. Bloomberg was. We'll talk about that a little bit. ChatGPT, or I should say GPT-4, is it getting worse? New data out from a research paper on that. We've got stories from Wix, AI 21 Labs. We've got some funding rounds, lots of stuff as per usual. And I'm Brett Kinsella, founder of VoiceBot.ai and Synthedia. And with me, my co-host, Eric Schwartz, head writer at VoiceBot.ai. Hey, Eric.
Hey, excited to get started.
Yeah, let's roll with it. Okay, so I probably should have already presented my screen, but the first story is going to be Llama 2. So Eric, tell me a little bit about what's going on with Meta and Llama 2.
Yeah, so Llama was Meta's generative AI model. They announced and released at the beginning of this year, and it was designed only for research, but immediately got leaked. And now they've come out with Llama 2. And rather than worrying about getting it leaked, they're just presenting it as a open license and open source option for those looking for businesses looking for a generative AI model. And they're distributing it through Microsoft and really just saying, hey, use us if you don't want to use OpenAI, if you don't want to pay for what Google or Microsoft is offering. And it could be a real shift in the race for enterprise in generative AI.
There are so many stories here. And so right now on the screen, what I have is the position of Llama 2 on the Open LLM leaderboard, which Hugging Face hosts. There's 4 different tests that it runs all the models through, and it's number 1 across the board. And it was interesting because the Llama 1 was at the top for a while, and then Falcon 40B knocked it off when a variant of Supercadi came up. But Llama 2, much better. There's actually a number of other tests that Meta published alongside, well beyond what's on the LLM open leaderboard, and shows really strong performance as well. And there's some really cool charts too in the the paper that came out with it, and shows it basically being comparable with ChatGPT across a number of different categories of testing. Now, granted, you can build a model to be good at tests. There's a lot of different things that happen. If informal testing, I've found Llama to be pretty good, but also I've seen a bunch of outputs. People have been sending me things about like my biography and that I'm a comedian out of the UK, which is not true because I am actually the only Brett Kinsella that's on the internet. And apparently he actually, four people he knows were all comedians, and he was listed as a magician, and he's not. He works for Amazon. So there are some issues with Llama 2. It's going to take some fine tuning and maybe some vector databases and embeddings to make it really good for you. But as you said, it's not just about being good. It's also free commercial. It's open source. There are some limitations, which I went through in the story this week, but this is going to be really significant because if you look at like Falcon 40B, there's a royalty associated with commercial use.
Yeah, it's the difference between paying for the engine and paying for the car. Really, it's what Meta is trying to say is that the real value for us is not in getting people to pay us for every time they use our generative AI engine. It's getting them to start using our engine for free and then turning to us for help building on top of that.
Yes, absolutely. And another big potential winner out of this is Microsoft. So Azure is the primary. Now they said it's also going to be available on Hugging Face and AWS, although it's not available on those today. The initial announcement with with Microsoft, and that's going to be the preferred partner for Azure for hosting it. And this is, I think, really interesting from a Microsoft standpoint. They famously made the big investment, quasi acquisition of OpenAI. They have OpenAI services on Azure so that people can get easy access to that in sort of a scalable cloud environment. But really, that was it. I mean, you could get Nemo as well. The original version of Nemo. I don't think not even the newest version of Nemo from NVIDIA. But now what they have is they have the leading proprietary solution in terms of mind share and in market share, I think, OpenAI. And with Meta, they may soon have the leading open source version because of the quality of the performance.
Yeah, it's definitely it's definitely a help for Microsoft. I mean, it's questionable, like why. I mean, there must be more to the deal than just Microsoft is an option. But I think that as Microsoft keeps pushing ahead with its OpenAI partnership, having Meta as their favored partnership for distributing Meta's tool means that they'll be able to stay on the cutting edge of whatever projects Meta does as well. So it's good. Yeah, Microsoft comes out a winner on this.
Yeah, and it's a sort of low risk for them because Meta has made a big investment. They're going to continue to make a big investment. They have one of the top AI teams in the world on staff. So really supporting this over time is probably a good business investment. And they're going to get all those cloud computing credits or cloud computing charges are going to start flowing through. A couple other things I'll just sort of bring up about this. Why is it so good? And we're looking at 7 billion, 13 billion, and 70 billion models. These are much smaller than OpenAI. Even if forget about GPT-4, just like GPT-3.5 or 3.5 Turbo, which runs ChatGPT, you're talking about something that's probably a third the size of those from a parameter standpoint, but it's much bigger in terms of tokens. You can see that up there in the middle. It's kind of small, but 2 trillion pre-training tokens. That's going to be much closer to what we think GPT-4 was trained on. The other thing is the context length doubled from Llama 1. Also important context. That's how much stuff the AI model can keep in memory, like in terms of what you've asked it ahead of time. We've talked about Anthropic with the giant one, but they've also done a lot of supervised fine tuning and RLHF. Reinforcement learning with human feedback. They have over 1 million inputs there. And so some of the thinking has been that more data, better curated data, and more human labeling of response quality could be the big benefit here.
Yeah, it's. I suspect the implications are going to become more obvious over time, and for now, it's just a sort of shock to the enterprise generative AI system.
Okay, so there are some limitations. If you are a commercial user, you can only use it for free up to the point where you have 700 million monthly active users. So if you got more than that, so I think they're like, oh, we don't want TikTok using this, or something like that. There's like a few people. We don't want Google using it for YouTube or something like that. They're sort of doing some sort of arbitrary cutoff. I don't know why 700, why not 500? I have no idea, but I thought that was interesting. There is one catch in there that I do point out in the acceptable use policy. So one of the licensing agreements is you have to comply with the acceptable use policy, or they can pull your license and then you're sort of supposedly not eligible to use it. You can't sue them. There's all sorts of other things. But in the acceptable use policy, there are a couple of things that are a bit arbitrary. And basically, you might have to comply with certain standards that Facebook sets around what disinformation is, or bullying, defamation. So these are not legal terms. They happen to be part of a legal licensing document. And so it's not clear to me like what the standards are for that. I don't know if they're going to publish more, but that would be the only thing that might give some folks pause, that you build a big business using the Meta model, and then all of a sudden Facebook says, oh no, wait a second, you're handling these, answers to these types of questions incorrectly. You can't use it anymore.
Yeah. I mean, it's not hugely different from licensing anything, really. I guess arguably you could say that because Meta's not charging for it, their client doesn't have any leverage to try to argue, if they disagree about a specific instance. But yeah, it all depends on enforcement, but at least at first glance, there's nothing like hugely morally offensive in their fine print. It's just the usual fine print from the company.
Yeah, absolutely. It's pretty reasonable, and it's free, and it seems like it's pretty good. So in the open source world, and this is what we'll close on. So the open source world is the Wild West. There's just lots of different players who have things out. There are many variants that are actually built on Llama 1, which you couldn't actually use for commercial use. So, bringing this out right now with a free commercial license, I think is really significant. And if you look at the way technology markets develop in these big spaces, generally you'll have one or two proprietary software leaders, and then you'll have usually one, sometimes two, but usually one really popular open source version. And so if Meta takes that spot, it's going to take it away from somebody else who's building that. Now, because of some of the reputational implications associated with Meta and Facebook and people's concerns about the company, I actually think in this case, we're going to have two open source. Now, there will be some specialists who will be really good at certain type of uses of LLMs. That's definitely going to happen. There's going to be big market fragmentation on that front. But in terms of general purpose models, it just seems like it's probably going to be Meta and maybe one other will emerge, and then we'll have two proprietary. So you're probably going to have 4 leading large language models emerge over time.
Yeah, it does raise some new questions, though, as well. We'll maybe talk about it another time, but the regulatory questions about creators versus distributors versus app builders.
Yes. I mean, and controllers, if you're thinking about GDPR.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. All right, so that was good. Meta, Llama, keep an eye on that. Really interesting. Hey, folks, you're here at the Generative AI News Rundown. We do this every week. Top stories in generative AI. You can watch this afterwards if you missed the segment on YouTube. So they're all up there in VoiceBot's YouTube channel. Andrew, maybe you can put the link to VoiceBot's YouTube channel with the @VoiceBotAI at the end in the chat. And if you're here, let us know you're here. If you're on LinkedIn, also, submit a comment. YouTube, just let us know you're here, what you're interested in today. Make comments, ask questions. Happy to get everybody involved. That's always really fun. And if you're on LinkedIn, just like that. Or if you're on YouTube, just like the video right now. We'd really appreciate it. It helps with the algorithm. Okay, our second top story this week is related to GPT-4 and its purported regression in performance. It's worse than it was 3 months ago, say some researchers from Stanford and Berkeley. And what they've done is they actually have 4 different types of tests. Basically, they're mostly around logical reasoning. There's one around coding. And then there's another one around safety. And what you can see, might be hard to see on the screen right here, but it shows in terms of being able to identify prime numbers, GPT-4 had almost a 98% performance rate in March of this year. And in June of this year, it was 2.4%. Surprisingly, GPT 3.5 went from 7% to, I can't even read what that is, up over 90% or 80% recently. And then there's some other things that just show it got worse. Now, it's really interesting. What they're talking about is what's a concept called model drift. So over time, models tend to overfit towards the questions and they can misinterpret things. And that can lead to a significant reduction in accuracy. And the important thing is if you're implementing large language models, you need to continuously test. So everyone thinks of continuous development, continuous integration. Continuous testing is really important because they're constantly updating. They're learning models. Even if you control the model, but in many cases you don't because you're piped into an API, they're updating the model on a regular basis. That could change the performance, the way the model works in your use case. And if it's a learning model, there's also people that are using it and it's learning from the people that are using it, and that can change it over time. So you need to do continuous testing to make sure your use case works. And that's one of the things I look at this and say, geez, is this true? So first of all, if it's true, it only means it's true for the things that they tested. it doesn't necessarily mean it's true for the things that you're using it for. So that's the first thing I would say. The second thing is it's not answering as many questions which are deemed to be unsafe, safety questions, those types of things. Is that actually worse or better? Like, it depends on what you want. Like, their guardrails are getting more strict. So, I think there's a lot going on here. There are a couple people who are starting to debunk this and saying, actually, for the core performance areas, it's doing just fine. But for these specific, logical reasoning capabilities, maybe it is. Maybe we do have an overfit problem, and the model needs to be updated.
Yeah, I think that's definitely all true. I also think that it's something that Sam Altman, the head of OpenAI, has said from the beginning, and that people from OpenAI have said as well, is that ChatGPT will come off as incredibly impressive at first, but that you'll be less impressed with it over time. And of course, this is supposed to be more of a quantitative measurement, but the argument that it comes off as amazing, but as the more you use it and the more you get comfortable with it, you'll start noticing its flaws and its problems. Then there's certainly that qualitative element of people feeling like it's not as good as it was, even though it's actually just that they're more aware of where it has problems.
Well, that's precisely what the VP of Engineering at OpenAI said about this on Twitter, although his comment was a little disingenuous. So he said, it's actually better. It's not worse. Sometimes, he said our hypothesis is that as you use it more, you're more likely to find places where it has errors. However, that's not quite right, because what we have researchers that use the same research protocol, the same testing protocol in March and June, and it's worse. Now, it's significantly worse. Now, some of that might be because there was some randomness involved. And I think a few of these things, I think there is randomness involved, sort of looking at the data. But I think it's really interesting. We have a comment here from Alan Furstenberg. One of the issues for this is how it impacts developers that are using the model, since they deprecate and get rid of the model every 6 months. I mean, some use cases, devs need to adapt every 6 months, and others need to recompute all your embeddings every 6 months. That's incredibly fast deprecation policy. And so deprecation means getting rid of it if you're not in the software development world. Totally true. Really important. You have to continually do your testing and upgrading, but these cycles, whether they're 6 months or 12 months, you're going to have all these upgrade cycles that are not going to be controlled by you. So it's a really significant issue if you're deploying an enterprise adoption.
Yeah. And I don't know, the thing about these very marginal changes is that it's not like it's starting to give the wrong answers all the time to things that it was giving the right answers to before. It's just a matter of how well it's, the overall performance is they're trying to measure. And I just wonder how good those sort of tests can be at this point.
Yeah, absolutely. And Jürgen Gravestein put up a link to the AI snake oil evaluation of this, which basically said, it's actually, yes, there is model drift, but no, the quality is not worse in their analysis. And that's generally what we look at and what we've concluded here as well at Synthedia. So definitely start to look at those. And so there's this other thing here. It's don't believe everything you see that's coming out, because researchers can be wrong. Science is not infallible, right? Just because a researcher puts it can be wrong, or it can be right, but it's right in such a narrow domain, particularly some of these math problems and logical reasoning. It doesn't necessarily mean it's going to impact you in your use of it. So that's one of those things that I thought we would bring up. At the same time, it's an instructive point to really talk about this idea of model drift, about regression and deprecation of models and how that's going to change over time. But really, really fascinating. Of maybe a faux controversy. I will say that there was a lot of back and forth about verbosity, and in some cases, GPT-4 has become too concise, and that it just says no or yes, and these types of things, as opposed to giving some context. But in other areas, it's just saying way too much, and it's oh, wait a second, we don't want this. Give me a chance to ask for more information as opposed to giving it all. Okay, so and Alan said, Eric made a big point right now. Prompt engineering is an art, not a science. We don't have great ways to do regression and continuous testing. And anybody who figures it out is going to be doing a great service to the industry with this testing. I think that's going to mean a lot for everybody. Okay, so we want to move on to our next set of stories for the day. And what do we have here? Our first one is, I don't even know how you say this. Cognaize raises $18 million to build a better LLM for the finance sector that keeps humans in the loop. A couple of important things there. What's going on, Eric?
Yeah, so I mean, this is part of the ongoing expansion of funding for different specific verticals in generative AI. In this case, looking at finance and banking and so on. And Cognaize, it's a New York startup. They're trying to apply generative AI and large language models without going so far as to eliminate the sort of human interface element that sort of, because there's obviously concern about how much to trust generative AI and where humans should keep an eye on things, and especially obviously when it comes to large amounts of money. So the idea here is that they're going to have an LLM that can help with finance specific questions and for financial institutions, but that is not doesn't have the sort of semi-automated approach of things like ChatGPT, where it can perform theoretically without a human intervening. And I think that's probably going to be important for especially more conservative institutions like banks or investors.
Yeah. So Satya Nadella talks about this a lot of times. He said, we used to have automated AI. Now we have co-pilots. We have human in the loop AI. And just expect to see more of that. There's a lot of these things, like we look at like contact centers and things like that. People are saying, hey, can I do this? Or will hallucinations like kill my customer satisfaction scores or make people sue me? There's going to be a lot of uses where there's a human reviewer somewhere in the loop. And I mean, that's one of the great things about generative AI. It allows us to basically amplify our own judgment, our own knowledge, our own capabilities from time to time. So I think that's pretty interesting. In the funding fountain category, we have another story, and that is Preply. I know you've looked at this, and I thought it was interesting. Okay, so they raised $120 million. They doubled down on AI. But I think they didn't mention generative AI as part of this. But we basically know that if they got 120 million at this new valuation, it's because there's a generative AI play.
Yeah, when a company talks about, in this case, Preply was famously not AI based. It was very much about humans teaching. But with the new money, they're talking about how they have had some AI aspects and that they're going to really invest in that and really build that out. And again, they don't use the term generative AI, but there's really no other approach to AI that would make sense in this case. And it's something that we've seen from a couple other linguistic education companies. And in this case, it's clear that to keep up, they're going to need generative AI to help them do what they do, but better and faster.
Absolutely. Okay, so another story in the funding realm, SAP. They've been a big investor in a bunch of recent funding rounds, which I was unaware of because they weren't really attached to those announcements. But SAP decided to tell everybody that like it's in the game too.
Yeah, this was funny. This was it feels like there was a behind the scenes argument between perhaps the PR marketing side and maybe the financial investment side over how much to publicize their involvement in several big rounds. Aleph, Anthropic, Cohere, these are all gigantic. They all recently raised a gigantic amount of money, and SAP has been sort of behind the scenes in a lot of it without really coming out and saying, "Oh yeah, we're all in on generative AI. We're really going to boost this industry." And now they seem to feel that it's there's nothing but good publicity can come from bragging about helping support and investing in this industry. So it's exciting in that sense that they feel comfortable about it, since SAP is very much a smoky rooms full of people with a lot of money deciding how the future of industry will go.
Oh man, the smoke-filled room. What a picture that is. Deciding on your $100 billion ERP implementation. Yes, I think it's interesting. Of course, SAP is investing in this space. How much they're actually doing in their own product set and what they're trying to figure out and how long that'll take because of how complicated those systems are and how they're systems of record and you can't mess with systems of record and on and on and on. A way that they can play and just say, I'm in the game is use Sapphire Ventures. That's their in-house strategic funding arm, and make a bet on a bunch of these places. And I think it's really interesting if you look at like Cohere and Anthropic or players like really focused on the business space. Anthropic, as you and I have talked about, we're somewhat bullish on, at least in the near term, because they seem to have solved the big context window issue, and at the same time maintained really strong performance, which means in this case low latency as well as good solution as good responses. So yeah, I think it's like everybody's got to be investing in this space, and they're just coming out and saying, "Oh yes, we're here too." So yeah, I have no problem with that. I just think it's going to be a long time before you're going to see many useful features in any SAP products.
Yeah, but it's clear that the biggest checkbooks are now open for generative
AI. All right, so let's see here. That's the funding round, and I will say that like something around funding rounds. Hey Ronald, good to see you here. Is that they seem less impressive than the previous weeks, and maybe that's because we had sort of a holiday season. A lot of the things that were announced recently, people tried to get them in before July 4th here in the U.S., and then maybe some of the other things were held over. I don't know, but just less action this week. And we've seen, a couple other things go on in terms of layoffs and things like that. So I think it's a summer downswing, but there is sort of a macro trend that like the valuations and the funding is going to taper a little bit. Although, I just heard about something. It might come out in the next 2 weeks. Another very large funding round in the generative AI space. So any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I don't think we've seen. I think there's a summer downturn, but there's also the sort of gold rush feeling. I think any startup with the right people and the right idea can very quickly entice investors into fueling a big round. So I don't think this is the tap has been shut off by any means. I think it's just going to be differing week to week where the big money is going.
Yeah, got it. Okay, so this is the Generative AI News Rundown. We do this every Thursday. We talk about the top generative AI stories of the week. If you want to look at previous weeks, because we've been doing this, I think this is our 24th edition every week since February. So you can look back. We have a long list. And actually, if you go into the Synthedia newsletter, so that's let's go to bit.ly/Synthedia. You will be able to find them all in there. And we also provide links. So you have all the links if you want to just do really quick research on what's been going on month to month, week to week in the industry. You've got all the links right there. You can watch us too. Like you can go back and our YouTube channel and watch all of the shows. But you can also just get the links really quickly if you want. And that's actually how most people, I figured this out. There's some people who watch live. There's some people who watch it afterwards. And then there's like 10x the number of people who just go use the weekly email, which has the video at the top, but then they just look it up, read all the links and click through and use that, which is fine. It's all good. Thanks a lot, Ronald, saying that we have a great show here. We appreciate it. All right. So I want to get to another big story this week. I don't know if it should be a big story, but it is a big story. AppleGPT, and it's built on the secret large language model, Apple's AJax. So I wrote about this, but what's your perspective, Eric?
I mean, the number of eyes on Apple right now is enormous. Everyone is watching to see what Apple does in terms of generative AI, whether it makes its own or decides to give it an enormous boost to an existing company. So this seems pretty well sourced. It's not surprising that Apple would want to have their own LLM, that they would want to not have to rely on Microsoft or Google. But it just feels like they don't want to make some of the mistakes that Google and Meta have made in terms of rushing things out that weren't clarity.
Oh, come on. Like, are you buying that line? I mean,
No.
This is just Apple trying to say, or it wouldn't even surprise me that this was a planned leak. This would not surprise me, because this is the way Apple has become. They're just not in this space. It's a mistake. They clung to AR VR too long. Not to say that that's not a thing, but it's probably, as Adam Shire says, probably 2035 before that becomes a really big market. Now Apple has enough resources to wait until then, but like they're really focused on that, and they've had some high profile AI people leave. Like this is. They have something. It's not better than what other people have.
Oh, no, sorry. I didn't mean to imply that it was going to be better. I was implying that they want to make sure that it's not.
No, but like, I don't think that, like, sure. Yes. They want to control their brand and things like that. But you really think that sounds like an excuse? We're going to wait. No, it's because it's not good enough.
Yeah, well, exactly. That's I don't think they have something good enough. I don't think they want to have an inferior product. So yeah, you're right. It would be surprising if it was a plant and they just want to keep interest high, but I don't know. I keep watching how slowly Apple products are integrating with ChatGPT, like the mobile app and so on. And I wonder if they're trying to play the center, be the center where everything goes through them again, like with the Apple Apple Store, the App Store, and if they want to try to do the same thing when it comes to LLMs.
Yeah, probably. I mean, if you want to use ChatGPT on iPhone, just download the app. Same thing with Bing Chat, like pretty good stuff. So there's a few people here today, I think, watching that will remember how slow Apple was to like just roll out a smart speaker. It's not really that complicated of a device. Once you figure out the far field voice recognition, and they already had Siri, but like they ignored it at first, and then they made a big say that they're going to do it, and then it was delayed, and then it was a flop. And they had to write off a significant portion of that inventory. Then they introduced a lower price model, and they're like, "Oh yeah, we'll keep this around." Improvements to Siri have been really slow. I just think it's like, if it's not a market that they're focused on, it's not a market that they're focused on. So I don't expect to see much of it. There was, in the article, they said, "Oh, people are expecting some big announcement next year, probably at WWDC." Yeah, we've been waiting for these types of announcements from Apple for a long time. They'll do AI as a back-end service, but they're not going to use AI as a front-end interface like anytime soon, I think. I mean, maybe by next summer they should do it. I mean, they have to, like the Vision Pro, the AR VR headset, that's going to really benefit from better voice commands and voice interaction. And LLMs are a better solution, and they could actually turn on a dime and do something interesting here. I don't buy it.
Yeah, I guess. I mean, yeah, I don't know. Is Apple going to just sort of become a bit of a dinosaur in the new world of generative AI? I mean, it's weird seeing Microsoft, which Apple ate so much of Microsoft's lunch when it at one point, 20 years ago, and now it feels very much the reverse.
Well, yeah, but think about, like, how did Microsoft do it? Like, how has Microsoft taken a leadership position in the space? They bought it. Yep. Yeah, they're just like they're just like the big pharmaceutical companies right now. They rarely do drug discovery themselves. They wait for some startup to go through the hard parts and take on all the risk, and then they buy the stuff that passes phase 1 clinical trials. Now, that was a significant change for Microsoft, because they have, I think it's $10 billion investment over the past decade. Actually, probably more than that over the past decade, but at least that, just in AI research. And like, what's come of it, right? What's came of it is they realized OpenAI had a better solution. And so that's another $10 billion, or 13 total, to buy half of that business. So I think part of it was just like, not invented here syndromes sometimes hurt your business prospects.
That's 100% right.
All right, well, let's talk about you mentioned Microsoft, so it's a good segue. Bing Chat Enterprise is out.
Yes, this is Microsoft continuing its attempt to be everywhere in generative AI, and as we've talked about for many weeks now, there's a rush for enterprise-focused generative AI projects, whether it's a chatbot or analytics tools or things like that. And so Microsoft is essentially saying, well, you love, you don't love, but people are using Bing Chat on the consumer side. What would it take to get businesses to also use it? And it turns out that they think the answer is more data privacy and more control over certain aspects of how the chatbot works, and that's all it takes to that. I think that's all it will take to get the same adoption or more adoption on the enterprise side as they have on the consumer side.
Yeah, and I think this will be an important competitor to enterprise search because they're allowing you to connect it to your own databases. There are, if you look at the demo, they sort of highlight the fact that like the data you enter as an enterprise user does not go back into the model for training purposes and all these other things. This is a logical progression. The one thing that actually kind of surprised me is where's ChatGPT for business? Because that was actually announced a while ago that it was coming, and it's not out, and yet Bing Chat Enterprise comes out first.
Yeah, I mean that was what was implied with ChatGPT Plus, was that they were building toward the enterprise kind of side of things. So I don't know.
Data protection, all these other things, right? That you want, some visibility, observability you want from a enterprise standpoint, but like that's not out yet. So I thought that was interesting because usually it goes the other way around.
Yeah. Yep. Odd approach, certainly.
Maybe the parent is now sort of saying, okay, well, we're going to be the first in the buffet line now to roll some things out. Although the other thing I'll say about this Bing Chat Enterprise is like, it was almost like crickets. They did it at Inspire, which is I think it's their partner event. And I mean, it's not that it wasn't announced, but it just wasn't like a lot of people weren't interested in it. It's like covering it. It's just like not a lot of chatter. Still a very big, important announcement, I think, because it is just another brick that they're building, and that sort of that citadel they're creating around 365 and copilots and generative AI.
Yeah, I think that's really what it is that it's not that they're saying here's an entirely new segment of products. They're saying keep using 365 and now enhanced with our Bing chatbot.
Okay. They're not the only ones with news this week. AI21 Labs came out with some new features. What's going on there?
Yeah, so AI21, they've been a significant, I would say, player, although sometimes maybe a little secondary in the news roundups with generative AI. But they've been plugging away with their own approach to enterprise focused tools, and in this case, that it comes in the form of an API called Contextual Answers, which is going to reduce how many hallucinations, how many wrong answers you get from talking to your AI, because it reduces the sources that the AI uses to formulate its answer. So what you get with hallucinations is if the AI doesn't know an answer, like for instance, who is Brett Kinsella, it'll come up with its own idea of what could be accurate, which is that you're a magician. It's not true, but it will argue that forcefully. And in this case, with contextual answers, if you're using AI21 and limiting it only to the Synthesia and VoiceBot databases, if supposing they were much larger, then it might say that it doesn't know an answer, but it won't come up with its own idea that is totally off base.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is one of the key solutions that every enterprise needs. It's like, okay, if you're going to use generative AI, it's amazing in a lot of ways, but how do you protect from the wrong stuff going out? So this sounds like a really good architectural approach, and it'll be interesting because AI21, they've got WordTune, so they've got the application, sort of like it's a Grammarly competitor. They've got that application stack. They've got the APIs, and we haven't seen them be a big player yet in enterprise where this is like sorely needed. Not to say that everyone doesn't need it, but this is where it's going to be most heavily implemented. So maybe this will be one of the areas where it brings it up. I will say that like people know about them. So in the enterprise buyer space, and everyone's going to have to get to do this. We had Guided AI on. They have the truth checker, a fairly similar type of thing, although it's not just limiting your data sources, but it's actually reviewing the output and those types of things. So I think that's going to be a really interesting space. All right. So next up, we have our friends at Wix. So they have this new thing called text to website. And when they came out with their generative AI integration a little while ago, it's like, oh, okay, that's fine. You can just say, hey, write me 3 bullet points on this page to describe this product and things like that. Well, they just rolled out, I think it's like 10 new generative AI products. And then they've got 4 things which are coming. One of which is this text to website, where you basically just say, I want a website like this. And then it shows you something. You say, oh, I want the rounded corners. I want to change the color. I want it to be more bold, right? And it just like keeps changing. It's like template after template. It's not available yet. If it works, it's pretty extraordinary.
Yeah, it's one of those things where all of the elements have been there. We've seen, obviously, text generation. We've seen image generation. We've seen design generation AI from places like Canva and Adobe. And in a way, this essentially just puts it all together into one. But Wix has so much data on what websites look like, what a good website looks like, what to avoid, that I can easily imagine that even before doing necessary edits and changes, that the initial version generated by this kind of AI will be 90% of the way there. So that's huge in terms of saving time and effort.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, I don't know if you guys can hear this, although it's just music in the background. Can you hear it?
Yeah.
I'm showing it on the screen. So what we're seeing here is basically someone's asking for a new website to be created. If you haven't seen this, it's a video, so who knows like how well it works, but it's pretty wild. Okay, so they're asking a couple of questions about what they want. It's coming back with some clarifications. You get to pick some images. Pretty straightforward. But then it automatically starts generating a site layout. And then you can go in and just like take a look at the site. You can make some changes. Sounds like the that's probably enough of that, but I just wanted to show people like what they can do, because, and in fact, we'll just go through a you want to change something, close team and everything, and then they ask for something that's a little bit edgier. It's like pretty wild. Now, what I will say is most of the things that we're doing with generative AI right now are things that are like daily activities. And so it just has like a ton of benefit every day. In this case, this is something you do infrequently, create a new website or update your website. But at the same time, it's super useful. In fact, we might update our websites more frequently if we had something this easy to use. And I really think that what we're doing here is we're starting to see a new set of expectations probably emerge among consumers. Because once you've seen this on Wix, are you going to change to Squarespace if they don't have it? Are you going to go to, and if you have to go to WordPress and like do it all yourself, WordPress has like AI writing assistant, but that's it. Are you going to do that? Or are you just going to be like, oh, this is actually not just good enough, it's better?
Yeah. And I think we're seeing more and more products that combine several generative AI steps. It's not just writing text and or creating an image. It's combining them into a presentation. It's creating videos from text descriptions. There's a lot, as people get better at writing prompts, or as the technology, of course, itself gets improves. I think this sort of leap, instead of taking a step, it's a leap ahead of productivity, theoretically, if it performs the way they say it will. And I think it's going to make things easier. I think there's all the concerns about losing jobs from AI. I think if anything, this will make it better for designers, because now they can skip all the very tedious coding steps and go straight into the actual creative parts.
That's true. And by the way, I noted this in the story about it. Wix announced basically an image generator. They're plugged in probably to Stability AI for Stable Diffusion. That's what it looks like to me. But they sort of, it was just like one line item. And like 4 months ago, it would have been like really big news. but because they're really focused on this website generator, I really, that dominated the storyline. But I thought it was very interesting. We have another interesting story in generative AI product land, which you talked about. Jasper AI laid off staff. And
Yes.
a lot, I think we came up with over 30 people that we saw had changed in the last 4 weeks, their status on LinkedIn. A lot of developers, a number of people in marketing as well, a couple of people in sales. What do you make of this?
I think it's interesting. It's all happened so fast. It's an artifact of pre ChatGPT, essentially. Before ChatGPT, OpenAI had this amazing engine for doing all kinds of potential products, including generating text and images, but they weren't doing it themselves. And Jasper seemed like the perfect choice for investors looking for a company that was going to give them essentially ChatGPT. And so they had Jasper Chat. They had the early stages of what OpenAI then came out with. So suddenly Jasper had to look for a new angle on what they were doing, and they've settled on marketing, and they've come up with essentially a text to marketing campaign platform and a lot of enterprise tools, and that may work for them, but that's not what they were building originally. So suddenly some of their developers don't quite fit into that project, and they need to cut costs because they raise a lot of money, but they don't have Microsoft money behind them.
Well, and some of the questions that people put online, and think about Bax T Future, who I don't know if he was officially an OpenAI ambassador, but he was one of the first GPT-3 users, good friend of the Synthetia community. He's just like, is OpenAI going to kill its developer ecosystem? Because ChatGPT does a lot of the features that Jasper does, and they have Jasper Chat, and they have the templates, and they have all these things. But if you look at it, it's like the workflow that's going to differentiate Jasper as opposed to the technology. And we noted a couple. Well, we had Shane Lorlick, who's the president at Jasper, on the VoiceBot podcast in January. He was talking about like all the new APIs and how they're going to be like a source for LLMs for businesses. Not a chance. I didn't believe it then. Like, I think this confirms it. They're going to be a SaaS application provider, which is an AI writing assistant, content generator, marketing campaigns. It might be a huge hit. It might be basically the next HubSpot in the space, but they're not going to be the source that everyone goes to for their foundation model is an API, because they're going to go direct to the source.
Yeah. I mean, this is what happens when platforms build software. I mean, this happens. So I can't imagine how many times it's happened where Google will put out a platform and third-party developers come up with all kinds of interesting ideas for applications, and then Google's like, oh well, we also built it and it's native and therefore works better, and suddenly all those third-party ideas don't quite fit anymore.
All right, folks, this is Gain, the Generative AI News Rundown. We do this every week on Thursday. We talk about the news of the week in generative AI, and there's always a lot of it this week. I can't tell you like how big the news was this week in terms of the potential to impact everything, although I think maybe the market's a little numb to it. Because we've had so many big announcements, so many big things, like, okay, where's it going? I'm actually seeing a lot of change in the market already, and like people using the tools in different ways. I just saw a Forrester study, which is unreleased, but I saw some of the data for it, and they did a survey of over 300 business executives, and 2/3 of them said they use ChatGPT or something similar to that every week, and some of them a significant portion of those daily. So it's like this is going everywhere. So everybody follow the YouTube channel. Please give us a like on the YouTube channel. Subscribe to the YouTube channel. That's youtube.com/the @voicebot AI, and also sign up for the Synthetia newsletter. It's free. Comes out every day. We do additional analysis, like supplements what we do here. That's just bit.ly/Synthetia, and read voicebot.ai. Eric has written, I think you're probably up around 500 or 600 articles in generative AI at this point.
Yeah. I mean, it's definitely a fire hose of things to cover.
Yeah. And the other things, we have some good archives there, by the way, like, cause we've been covering generative AI since 2017, BERT in 2018, like GPT-3 in 2020. Like even as of last year, I think we had 150 stories. So if you're looking for history, you're looking for where things started, how people have pivoted, which they don't tell you now. You'll actually see it in our archives. If you just go to voicebot.ai, under topics, generative AI or synthetic media, good way to do that. Okay, so got another story here. OpenAI. They're working with the Associated Press. Why?
Well, I think if there's one area that there's been both excitement and sort of hilarious stumbling when it comes to employing generative AI, it's the news media. There's been a few particularly notable failures of attempting to create news stories with generative AI, only to then have them immediately put out things that are wrong in over the top ways. So I think perhaps OpenAI is trying to move past that, and also looking for, of course, new sources of information to train their models. And the AP has, over 100 years worth of news articles from all over the world that could really give ChatGPT and its various the other software coming from OpenAI could really make them better at talking like a human and explaining events like a human. So I think,
absolutely.
Yeah, big one for Apple.
And also, I wonder if they're going to do this as like maybe a hybrid model, vector database for certain types of questions. They just, instead of just sending to the main model, they send first to the AP data set to pull back sort of current events, news, saying that's like a source of truth. And then they use the LLM again to sort of pretty up the response. I could see that happening for sure. To me, that's the data. That's the big win here. Now, there's some other benefits potentially where this would probably keep the AP from suing them potentially for copyright infringement in the future. In addition to the text stories, I think there's 60 million images that they have in their catalog, which obviously OpenAI can use for DALL-E. It looks like they announced a licensing agreement, so I believe that OpenAI is paying something, but it might be pro bono, or like a quid pro quo, where they get access to this, but then the Associated Press gets to use OpenAI tools for some reduced rate or free or something like that. But I think it's really interesting. We've talked about this before. Data matters. If you can get access to more data, more highly curated data, that can be a real differentiator. Your quality is going to go up. People are going to be more satisfied with your LLM service.
Yeah, the AP is getting out of it is sort of vague. They talk about access to technology and such, but they don't really make clear what that looks like, except that they do make a point of saying more than once that it's not coming in to replace any journalists. It's not going to start putting out stories, although it supposedly will become more available to reporters when they're working on their own stories.
Absolutely. And folks, I forgot to say, we're going to do winners and losers of the week at the end. If you've got your winners and losers of the week, let us know. We'd surely like to hear them. I'll try to put a few of the story links also in the chat here so people can find them. By the way, you get the story links automatically. It should be tomorrow when we post this video in the Synthedia newsletter. We'll have all the story links in there. But we'll try to put a couple in there too, because a couple of people have asked for them. Okay, so we do have another story that we want to talk about before we get to winners and losers. And that is our old friends at Deepfakes. Now, mostly we talked about Deepfakes, which have been sort of fun, or sometimes they've been poor implementations. But I think we just talked about Virgin Cruises with GenAI. We have a different story this week. We haven't seen a lot of these, but they're starting to crop up. And this is deepfake used for fraud. If you look at the Google searches from before last summer, almost every story about deepfake was about fraud. And it was usually some former FBI agent who was saying, I'm so worried about this, and this is going to be a big problem. But then there was like almost no examples. So like there were basically 2 banking examples a year and a half ago, and that was about it. But we're starting to see a lot of this. Particularly, we're starting to see a lot of one-on-one attacks where people are trying to impersonate a child or something like that. Just looked at something along these lines in Canada where somebody was doing that and getting like $10,000 to bail their son out of prison or out of jail. But this really interesting thing came up last week. Martin Lewis he's like a consumer advocate in the UK, very famous. And basically someone created a deepfake of him pitching a new solution or a new investment called Quantum AI, led by Elon Musk, and just basically start to invest. And people started doing it right away.
Yeah, it's an impressive deepfake. It's what this technology has done is really given these kinds of scammers. It's not like these kinds of scams didn't exist, but usually it would be just a picture of someone and a text claiming that it was quoting them. And in the Martin Lewis case, it's particularly interesting partly because of worries about these kinds of scams in general, he's made a point of not endorsing anything like this ever and never would. But not necessarily everyone knows that. And when they can not only see a picture of him, but also supposedly hear his voice and hear him talk about it at length, it's going to be more convincing to people who may or may not know how good deepfake technology has gotten. And Martin Lewis is very famous in the UK as a consumer advocate, as someone who tries to call out when things are either worth have value or are not worth it. And even he said that this is particularly scary, and he's worried this is going to become a common issue that he has to deal with, which is a scary thought. Although, yeah, I wonder how much of the responsibility for this is going to fall on the platforms that don't necessarily check every ad.
Exactly. And in our story, we talked about some of the companies that are doing some things along these lines, Pindrop, Resemble, that actually have deepfake detectors. I actually think that, ultimately these are good enough. Like even with that, there were some things you could actually pick out if you were really looking at it. But with broadcast media on social media platforms or news, there are glitches all the time. So it's really hard, particularly in a shorter segment.
Yeah.
It is definitely good enough. And I think that means that media companies, social media platforms, and enterprises all over the place, this is just going to be part of their security stack. It's just going to be something they have to do.
Yeah, this is a particularly prominent video one, but there's been a lot of stories of people being tricked just by audio of getting a phone call ad or hearing something that that sounds like someone they trust telling them to invest in something, or the more particularly heart-wrenching ones where it sounds like their family member is calling them, asking them to send them money. And I think, yeah, there's going to have to be a lot more caution about trusting those kinds of stories and ads.
Yep. Much more coming up on deepfakes. So we're going to be really quick about this. Winners and losers of the week. I'll say losers for me is all of the open source model developers. It's not to say that it's terrible for you going forward. It's just going to be harder now that you've got a tech giant that's basically giving away something for free in the open source community, which is really high quality because they've got a lot of resources to put behind it.
Yeah, that's fair. I would say there's the winners are partly because of it, but the winner is going to be the companies that have deepfake detection software. As these kinds of stories pop out, interest and demand for technology that can tell when something is a deepfake is going to attract a lot of interest, I think, and a lot of money.
Got it. Do you have a loser for this week? Do you have the same loser?
Yeah, I'd say that's definitely the.
How about Jasper AI?
Yeah, I was about to say
all the people who have to compete with their primary technology supplier.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think any startup that's maybe been behind the scenes quickly coming up with software and now realizing that they may have to compete with the source of their software is a problem.
All right, my winner this week is Microsoft Azure Cloud Services, getting another big LLM solution to offer alongside OpenAI. I think it rounds out their portfolio nicely. They've got this in-house proprietary solution that everybody knows about and is like sort of viewed as bulletproof. Plus, if their customers come along and say, actually, I'd like to do open source. Hey, we have this other one that's also very good, and it's comparable or very good, very close to what we have. All right, folks, this has been the Generative AI News Rundown. Thanks a lot for joining us. Please join us every week and on Thursdays. And also like the video, please, or like the post in LinkedIn. We really appreciate everyone being out here. Thanks for joining. Thanks for making your comments this week. Bye-bye.